Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Valery. I'm a student at Rise School. As you can see on screen, our topic today is object-oriented programming in JavaScript. By the end of the presentation, you have learned about popular programming paradigms, classes with properties and methods, difference between class and prototype. You'll know how to create objects in ECMAScript 5 and ECMAScript 6 and realize inheritance. In addition, I've told you about private views in JavaScript. Please interrupt if you have any questions. To begin with, let's get acquainted with three basic programming paradigms. So first is object-oriented programming. It's a programming paradigm based on the concept of objects, which may contain fields with data, often known as attributes, and functions, often called as methods. Next is functional programming. It's a style of building the structure and elements of a computer program that treats computation as the evaluation of mathematical functions and avoid changing state and mutable data. Next is procedural programming. It's derived from structured programming based upon the concept of the procedure call. Procedures simply contain a series of computation steps to be carried out. Let's turn to the objects. An OP application will use the collection of objects which know how to perform certain action and how to interact with other elements of the application. For example, an object could be a person. That person would have a name, that would be a property of the object, and would have know how to walk. That would be a method. Another important aspect of object-oriented programming are classes. A class can be considered as a blueprint for an object. So now we come to the next point, which is creating a new object. First, you can use keyword new. Second, you can define a JavaScript object with a simple object literal. Third, if you need to create many objects, you want to combine the power of object literals and factory functions. And fourth, object create methods creates a new object using an exciting object as the prototype. As we know, object can have methods. There are three types of methods according to its influence on data. Let's use array as built-in JavaScript object with all methods type. Firstly, methods that return a new value or representation are known as accessor methods. Array prototype includes returns true if the array contains an element, otherwise false. Secondly, methods that modify the original array are known as mutative methods. Array prototype pop removes the last element of the current array. Thirdly, methods that walk through all items are known as iterator methods. For example, array prototype for each applies the function to each element of the array. Be aware that iterators can act like accessor or mutator. For example, array prototype for each can act like mutator, depends on function, when array prototype map always creates new array and does not affect the origin data. Now I want to describe common method types for object, getters and setters. In our class, on the side we have a getter and setter whose name property. We use underscore before property name to create a separate value in which we store our name property. To show the current value of the name property of the snake object, we can use the snake name getter method. To assign a new value to the name property, we can use the snake name setter method. Also, that's the way how in JavaScript make private variables inherited from Python. However, underscore doesn't change access rules, it's just for programmers. We still can change property underscore name property. Also, there is a static keyword which defines a static method or property for a class. Neither static methods nor static properties can be called on instances of the class. Instead, the code on the class itself. So, how to create an object using JavaScript? Before ECMAScript 6 standard, it looks like on the slide. We define function with parameters first name and last name, which used to fill data of a new object. Also, we can add methods for our new object. In this case, we add getFullName methods for all instances of the class, um, so we need to add prototype between person and getFullName. And it doesn't matter if instance was created before adding this method. If we want to add this method only to this instance, we just need omit prototype. In a result, this method will work only for this instance. For other, it will create type error. Here we can see ECMAScript 6 syntax, which looks more beautiful, but this is only synthetic sugar. It means that this only makes the language sweeter for a human eye. Nothing has changed in the core. It is still a function. Let's move to inheritance. It's an important concept in object-oriented programming. In the classical inheritance, methods from base class get copied into derived class. In JavaScript, inheritance is supported by using prototype object. Some people call it prototypal inheritance and some people call it behavior delegation. Classes are not used at all. Instead, objects are created from other objects. Let's take a look how to create user from person. We create function user with two parameters for person constructor and email with password for user. This is similar to the person constructor in many ways, but there is something strange here that we've not seen before, the call function. This function basically allows you to call a function defined somewhere else, but in the current context. The first parameter specifies the value of this that you want to use when running the function, and the other parameters are those that should be passed to the function when it is invoked. We want the user constructor to take the same parameters as the person constructor it is inherited from, so we specify them all as parameters in the call invocation. In order to use person methods, we need to copy its prototype. But as we know, constructor property is located in prototype, so last code line will delete person constructor. The only way to fix it is to write next line. User prototype constructor is user. Then we can add a new methods for all users instances and create them. ECMAScript 6 introduces class syntax to JavaScript as a way to write reusable classes using cleaner syntax, which is more similar to classes in Java. To create a subclass, we use the extends keyword to tell JavaScript the class we want to base our class on. Instead of person call, we use support function. And we even don't need to write prototype copying. Next, I'll focus on encapsulation. It's packing data and function into one component, for example a class, and then controlling access to that component to make a block box out of the object using getters and setters. Because of this, a user of that class only needs to know its interface. This is the data and functions exposed outside the class. Inside the words, in other words, we hide all core processes and give only interface to use it. In other languages that support object-oriented paradigm, there are access modifiers that limit the scope of a property or method of class. For example, in Java they are public protected, package protected, and private state. In JavaScript we can emulate private state using closures over private data in constructor. Another way is a private data instance of weak map. When a new person is created, a new record is added to the weak map to store the private variables. The key in weak map is this, although a developer can access the instance of the person object. He cannot access private data from outside of that instance. Any method that wants to access this data simply passes its instance, which contains the method. In this example, getName gets the entry and returns the name property. It seems to me that JavaScript can't fully realize object-oriented programming paradigm. On the other hand, this paradigm has its drawbacks and not what we have to use everywhere. Summing up, you just should know how to deal with object-oriented programming in JavaScript and don't be afraid to use it. Thank you for your attention. That's all for today. Feel free to ask any questions. Thank you for your attention.